Welcome to Heart of a Shepherd. Our study in the book of Numbers is nearly at the end, and we are today in Numbers 31 and 32. The title of the devotional, Feeling Safe and Satisfied Can Be a Dangerous Place to Live. I invite you to open your Bible to Numbers 31. Well, we are closing in on the final chapters, and although our study has been historical in context, I assure you, it is foundational to a broader and deeper understanding of the Scriptures. And so I encourage you, don't get weary. The journey is enriching and will prove worthwhile as we continue our chronological study of the Old and New Testament Scriptures. Well, in Numbers 31, we come to a war of revenge against the Midianites. So we have in the first two verses God's command to Israel: go to war. Now, having been told that his death was imminent, the Lord commanded Moses in Numbers 31 and verses 1 and 2, avenge the children of Israel of the Midianites. Afterwards shalt thou be gathered unto thy people. Moses, this is your last act. This is your last moment of leadership. Lead the children of Israel to have vengeance against the Midianites, knowing you will die soon after. Moses then spoke to the people, and we read in verses 3 and 4 that he rallied them to arm themselves for war and to raise up from every tribe 1,000 men to wage war against Midian. And then, with an army of 12,000 men, we read that Phinehas, who was the zealous son of Eleazar the priest, was commanded to go to war with the army and the trumpets to blow in his hand. Well, the victory of the Midianites is recorded in Numbers 31, verses 3 through 8. Now, strategically, it was crucial for Israel to eliminate all nations on the east side of the Jordan that could threaten their campaign in Canaan. Thus, the Lord determined to avenge Israel against Midian, because the kings of Midian had employed Balaam, the seer, to curse Israel, and their women had enticed the men of Israel to sin. So now the Lord is going to have his revenge. Now, Numbers 31 and verse 8. Israel slew all the men of Midian, including 5 kings, and guess what? The prophet Balaam, whom they slew with the sword. Now, the army of 12,000 warriors achieved a glorious victory, and we're told in verse 49 that no soldier from the 12 tribes was lost in the battle. Now, verses 4 through 9. Now, beginning in verse 9 through 18, we have an interesting moment in Israel's history regarding the spoils of war and a foolish choice. So Israel's soldiers returned to the camp with the spoils of war, which included Midian women and children, their cattle, flocks of sheep, and possessions, verse 9. Now, all the cities and fortresses of Midian were destroyed, verses 10 and 11. Now, when the soldiers returned from the battle, they were met outside the camp by Moses. Now, he's ancient now, and nevertheless, there's still a fire in his soul. And so Moses met these soldiers coming back with the women of Midian and all the other things that they had taken, along with Eleazar the priest and the chief leaders of the tribes. Now, seeing the women of Midian among the spoils, we read that Moses was furious, for he remembered how they, the women of Midian, had lured the men of Israel. Now, that was recorded in chapter 31. And so, except for virgins, Moses ordered that all the Midianite women be slain and every male among the little ones. And so Israel was not to allow any young boys to live. Why is that? Boy, that seems so harsh. Listen, he's very much conscious of the fact those young boys could grow up and become the enemies of God's people. Even the Midianite women, only the virgins were spared. Then we have an interesting moment of purification, the ritual of purification, beginning in verse 19 through verse 24. And so before the soldiers reunited with their families, we read they were commanded to stay outside the camp for 7 days. Now, those 7 days were in time to purify themselves and wash their clothes and all their goods. So they were not to enter the camp with the blood of the enemy on them. And then we have, in verses 25 through 54, the distribution of the spoils, and by the way, the Lord's tithe. So the balance of Numbers 31 addressed the large sum of people and goods taken in the victory over Midian and the distribution of the spoils. Now remember, only 12,000 men were taken and went to war against Midian. And so you had the rest of the people of Israel that were back in the camp and were not allowed to go take part in the battle nor enjoy the spoils. And so God intervenes here. So each soldier, we read, that came back from the battle of the 12,000 was awarded a half portion of the spoils that were taken. The other half was divided among the congregation. And then finally, we read in verses 48 through 54 that the tribute or the tithe was given to the priest. So even though the priest didn't go to war, the tithe of that which had been taken in battle was given to them. And then briefly, Numbers 32. Here we have the division of the land on the east side of the Jordan River. Numbers 32, verses 1 through 5. And so 2.5 tribes of Israel, you might remember this from an earlier study, Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, they came to Moses and they petitioned him that he would assign them land on the east side of the Jordan, not in the land of Canaan, not in the promised land, but outside of the promised land on the east side of the Jordan River. Well, these tribes, Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, reasoned that the land was fertile and could support their livestock. Well, we have then Moses' misinterpretation of the request of the tribes in verses 6 through 15. Moses' first reaction to the request was swift because he feared those tribes were deserting the nation and shirking their obligation to assist in conquering the promised land. Well, he misread their intent. And so in verses 16 through 42, the three tribes, Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, gave an assurance of their intent to go to war. And so Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh answered Moses and assured him they were ready to fight for Israel. But still, after Canaan was conquered, they desired to return to the grassy fields, the pastures on the east side of the Jordan River. Verses 16 through 42. Well, there's a closing thought I want to share with you here. And it is that the compromise between Moses agreeing to Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh's request appears to be, well, okay, all's well that ends well. Such, however, was not the case. You see, the leaders of those tribes did keep their vows and they did fight with their brethren in Canaan. However, their decision to build homes and raise families outside of Canaan on the east side of the Jordan River would prove to be disastrous in the years ahead. In fact, in the following generations, Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh would be not only geographically distant from the other tribes, but ultimately spiritually distant from the Lord. Later, we will read concerning those tribes, Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. In 1 Chronicles 5 and verse 25, we read, they transgressed against the God of their fathers, and they went whoring after the gods of the people of the land. And so even though it seemed pragmatic, even perhaps reasonable, to stay on the east side of the Jordan River because they had flocks and they wanted the flocks to enjoy the grassy pastures of the east side of the Jordan, nevertheless, for their family, it proved to be a tragedy. And so Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh were convinced that the land just short or just shy of the promised land was good enough. And yet that decision became a great sorrow for their children. As a result, Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh were the first to turn from the Lord. And by the way, they were the first taken captive by Assyria. Well, here's a lesson. No halfway, half-hearted service for the Lord will ever be blessed. Well, thank you for being a part of our study, and I look forward to continuing with you as we conclude our study in the book of Numbers. God bless. and bye-bye.